I'm actually Maya Șerpănescu because my hair is blue. And I read a manifesto against cleansing, a feminist introduction to the literary strike. This text will share the fate of a female flaneur, a word with such an inappropriate resonance, generating an almost monstrous image, a deviation. She may only cross dedicated, well-defined spaces. Of course, these spaces differ in size, importance, and degree of freedom, according to a specific person generically called she. If you go back in time, we will understand. There was, and is, a she who toiled within the perimeter of a courtyard, a she always looking out the window, a she traveling alongside a real flaneur for longer or shorter periods, depending on how well she could mimic his steps and not leave a trace, a she too old to have any space left. That happens simply because she is the space itself. That is how they let her enter the world of man, as a necessary, static, empty space, to be filled. How could one accept a moving space that cannot be captured? What happens when space itself becomes a flaneur? For there was also a she lost in the dark streets of the city or cast outside the citadel, without space and without history, they say. But wherever any form of existence lives, there is both space and history. It is precisely from there that a she once emerged, and no one knew anything about her. That she was confined in a laboratory, in a space of experimentation. Let's wonder, with whom did the white man's gaze associate this space? Does she produce it? Is the laboratory the bridge through which she was allowed to enter his world? And yet, she was forcibly brought here. Her wandering stopped, confined and subjected to the investigative gaze, a curiosity. The submission of the moving space, labor of knowledge, and its understanding requires placing your own story in that space, leaving your trace. That is, in fact, what literature teaches us, to leave deep traces in a moving world. Literature is the school of knowledge and mastery of the space submission. There, the investigative gaze is produced. It will then deny its origin to create a practical text applied to the world. In this way, the laboratory becomes the space where literature materializes its gaze. This is the fate of the female flaneur. Once confined and supervised, how can she live? Without stepping in his footprints, without being offered as a space for research and wandering, without abandoning the other imprisoned beings, without contributing alongside him to the consolidation of this literature school for the investigative gaze, a literature of confining all form of existence. This is a revolt against the investigative gaze and discrediting of the laboratory. Literature no longer supports or produces spaces for him, but instead begin to wander across and through him, contaminating, altering, and entangling the elements. The movement of elements and forms of existence is slow, but it removes all these forms of existence from the reach of the gaze. The investigative gaze no longer represents them. It becomes ineffective and shuts down. The literary production of such a gaze stops. We go on a literary strike. The laboratory space where the literary strike went on liberates the body subjected to experimentation. Once freed, this body must wander through the world marked by the investigative gaze. There, literature still functions as the product of that gaze. To skip a wall, this means to find a stopping point where the text of the liberated body does not merely fulfill a rebellious function, but also becomes literature. We need a reconfiguration of the space. But how do we change literature? In this respect, I position myself in this field of forms of existence as a writer with an alienated body limited to two possibilities of making literature: creating vast spaces always for the real flaneur and supporting his project of submission, or halting literature for a time, more precisely moving the space and making it inaccessible. Then resuming the work of its reconfiguration together with the other working bodies. We will exclude what has excluded us. This process of excluding those who violently exclude is, in fact, an act of inclusion and cooperation, of bringing together the negated and eradicated elements, those prevented from manifesting. Once they meet within new relationship and networks, a space for collective writing will emerge. I am not talking here about a collaborative literature or collective projects. I suggest rather another way of understanding literature and employing different mechanisms to produce literary discourse. Literature, even when written in solitude, is a collective product. There is no singular author. Thus, the need to be unique becomes a source of despair and suffering. Where should we start from? How do we trigger the literary strike? Probably from the only certainty we have, because it covers our bodies and we experience it daily, our own alienation. Not a simple, bizarre otherness manifested in an ideal field of ideas. It is the alienation of our bodies, illness and physical collapse, the monstrous deformation of organs. By politicizing it, alienation helps us disentangle ourselves from a harmful entanglement. It helps us begin together the process of overcoming it. The gaze of the alienated and the animal invaded by the plants and things no longer seeks morphological analysis. It seeks to perform a context for coexistence. A gaze invaded by plants is created outside the school of literature. It is the eye desiccated by the investigative gaze, forced into a vegetative existence and fictionally represented by laboratory imagery. What the investigative gaze has never understood is that roots are not equivalent to stasis. That if you bury plants deep in the ground, you do not stop them. You give them life, and their movement is calm and imperceptible and unpredictable. They stretch everywhere and erase all boundaries. What the investigative gaze has never understood is that the gaze, due to protective ocular pigments, is a chemical process made possible by contamination and assimilation of plant stems. The eye is a photosynthesis organ. Light cannot destroy it. This movement may begin like any revolt, with halting the production sustained by investigative gaze, going on a strike, proposing demands, and reconfiguring the relation so that, in the end, she will generate the revolutionary space.